Welcome to a true story from the history of the Cripple Creek Mining District. This video is copyright 2026 by Thomas Saunders. George Callicott was a railroad engineer in the Cripple Creek District of Colorado in 1903 when he was killed in an accident, leaving a widow and 6 children. George was born in 1862 in Nebraska Township in Page County, southwestern Iowa. He was a middle child in a family of 6 children. By age 19, he was living with family in Minnesota and working as a fireman for a railroad, an industry he would remain in for the rest of his life. In the late 1880s, George was living in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where in 1886 he married 20-year-old Kate Boggins. The Callicott's first child, Nora, was born in Pine Bluff in 1888. The Callicotts continued to move around quite a bit, George working for different railroads in various states, including Washington State, Utah, and Kansas. And George and Kate continued to add to their family. When the family moved to the Cripple Creek District about 1899, they had 6 children, ranging in age from 1 to 11 years old. After arriving in the district, the Callicotts lived for a couple of years in Victor before moving to Cripple Creek. George went to work as an engineer for the Florence and Cripple Creek Railroad. There were 3 railroads serving the district at the time: the Midland Terminal Railway and the Colorado Springs and Cripple Creek District Railway were standard gauge railways, and the Florence and Cripple Creek Railroad was narrow gauge. On standard gauge railroads, the tracks are 4 feet 8.5 inches apart. On the Florence and Cripple Creek Railroad, the tracks were 3 feet apart. Engines and rail cars were smaller on narrow gauge lines. On the evening of July 12, 1903, at about 7 p.m., George Callicott was engineer aboard F&CC train number 69 traveling north from Victor to Cripple Creek. Train number 70 heading south from Cripple Creek to Victor was due, and Callicott had been ordered to meet it at Eclipse. At Eclipse, the F&CC tracks headed northeast before making a very sharp curve back southwest in Iroquois Gulch. Callicott leaned out of the door of the cab to try to see how close the southbound train was. He had not yet applied air to the brakes in preparation to stop his train. Just then the engine lurched and Callicott was thrown out of the cab. The fireman thought Callicott had jumped and thought a collision was imminent, and instead of applying air to the brakes himself, he jumped out of the engine. At this point, train number 69 and number 70 were rapidly approaching each other on the same track. Fortunately, Conductor Wilcox had seen the engineer fall and realized that the brakes had not been applied. He managed to crawl over the tender and into the cab and set the brakes. Then, even before the train had come to a complete stop, he jumped from the cab and pulled Callicott's body clear of the tracks. Callicott was in bad shape. After falling from the engine, he had struck the embankment at the side of the tracks and rolled back under the train. He was lying face down, and his back had been struck again and again by the suspension of each of the train cars as they passed over him. Callicott was put aboard a train and taken to Cripple Creek, where the ambulance met him at the depot. He was taken to Sisters Hospital, where Dr. Magruder could do little more than try to make him comfortable. His lumbar spine had been crushed by being struck multiple times by the suspension of the train cars. Callicott, although in extreme pain, was conscious and asked for his wife. Kate got to the hospital before he died. She was left a widow with 6 children, 5 to 15 years of age. Services were held in the Elks Hall, and then lodge members escorted Callicott's remains to the Catholic Church, where Father Carr officiated services there. George Callicott was a member of the Cripple Creek Elks Lodge, and he's buried in the Elks section of Mount Pisgah Cemetery in Cripple Creek. His name is among those listed on the imposing monument in the Elks section. His widow Kate remarried in 1909 in Denver, lived a long life, and is buried elsewhere in Colorado. This is the end of our video. Thanks for watching.